I want to talk about food because, again, there you go, popping up. What was it, 3.8% in
Yeah.
April compared to
So,
last April?
so Michael, if you go back 2 months, not 6 months, two
Mm-hmm.
months, our food inflation rate has tripled, almost tripled in 2 months, while in the US, the food inflation rate is actually dropping, despite
Yeah.
all the craziness around
Yep.
the Trump administration and tariffs. Because typically you would think, well, if the Americans are actually putting tariffs on anything coming into the US, surely you would see inflation as becoming a problem. It's not happening at all because they have a stronger economy. There's more population density. There's more competitiveness there in the
Yeah.
US. They can adapt. You saw Walmart. Walmart's jab last week against Trump was very much a political jab. They can absorb the tariff.
Yeah.
Walmart is huge and effective and competitive, so they can actually absorb tariffs as much as anybody, really. So that's why that. No, I think that Donald Trump makes a good point. Doesn't mean that his decisions are good or sound, but Walmart is just one example of how America is well tooled to deal with tariffs, while in Canada we're not, and that's why our food inflation rate has tripled in just 2 months.
You saw the inflation numbers going back, I guess it was on Tuesday. Again, Canada inflation up. But the point that jumped out at me was looking at the food inflation. I thought, what a fabulous week. We'd already booked Sylvain Charlebois. He's the director of the Dalhousie agri-food analytics lab, but they do tons of great work. They're the people who put out, price projections, what's going on in the marketplace, et cetera. Sylvain, thanks for taking the time. And as I say, I got a great week to have you on because you've been busy.
Yeah, you saw things ahead of time, and frankly, I just I was concerned for a long time, but numbers are
Mhm.
telling me now that we had every right to be concerned,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And when you get to adopt bad policy, when you follow bad policy, bad things happen to a country, and that's kind of what the story is right now with StatsCan's numbers.
Well, let's talk about the food in particular. One of the things I'm actually proud of is we never focused on, and on this show we didn't focus on inflation. We focused on stuff people couldn't avoid buying because, as
Yeah,
we both know, 700 goods. I'm not buying most of them, so I don't care. But
yeah.
food is number one. Gasoline, energy prices in general, we've been going up with that, and shelter. But I want to talk about food because, again, there you go, popping up. What was it, 3.8% in
Yeah.
April compared to
So,
last April?
so Michael, if you go back 2 months, not 6 months, two
Mm-hmm.
months, our food inflation rate has tripled, almost tripled in 2 months, while in the US, the food inflation rate is actually dropping, despite
Yeah.
all the craziness around
Yep.
the Trump administration and tariffs. Because typically you would think, well, if the Americans are actually putting tariffs on anything coming into the US, surely you would see inflation as becoming a problem. It's not happening at all because they have a stronger economy. There's more population density. There's more competitiveness there in the
Yeah.
US. They can adapt. You saw Walmart. Walmart's jab last week against Trump was very much a political jab. They can absorb the tariff.
Yeah.
Walmart is huge and effective and competitive, so they can actually absorb tariffs as much as anybody, really. So that's why that. No, I think that Donald Trump makes a good point. Doesn't mean that his decisions are good or sound, but Walmart is just one example of how America is well tooled to deal with tariffs, while in Canada we're not, and that's why our food inflation rate has tripled in just 2 months.
I'll come back to that in a second. I want to flesh out more with the food inflation because people are sitting there nodding their head. I mean, I'm looking at stuff like you recorded it and you've put it on the Food Professor, but you got beef up 16.5%. And again, I've been shopping recently, and I told my kids they weren't
Can you
worth the
afford
steak.
beef anymore?
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, what was it?
Yeah.
16.5% April to
Yep.
April?
Absolutely. And we
Wow.
were predicting it. You and I
Yes.
spoke about Canada's food price report 6 months ago.
Yep.
Everything that's going on right now, we predicted 6 months ago. So it's not much of a surprise. The 3.8% is a bit of a shocker, but we were predicting an inflation rate of up to 5% by the end of the year. So we're basically
Oh,
on
yeah.
target still. And we knew that beef was going to be a big driver because there's just no supply out there, both in Canada and in the US.
And it is beef that's leading the way, of course. But I mean, it's not like meat products are getting less expensive. I mean, my gosh, they're
Yep.
bumping pretty good, certainly above wages for Canadians.
There are no, so we're into May, close to June. People are thinking about their barbecues way more often now, despite the lousy
Iffy
weather
weather.
we're getting across the country, really. But I think barbecue season will actually will burn soon for sure. And when people go to the meat counter, they'll notice that there are very few good deals now. Last year, pork was the way to go, but this year, unfortunately, pork has gone up in price. The industry in Canada has right-sized itself because of
Hmm.
what's going on with China. Beef is still expensive, and of course, poultry has been impacted by the avian flu. So we are seeing prices creeping up. Despite being a supply managed commodity, of course, and despite being a very, very efficient way to turn fiber into protein, chicken is still a problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at eggs. Well, of course, that's supply management. I'll get to that in a second. But we're looking,
Yeah.
at fruit up
And by the way, the most
5%.
expensive chicken in the country is BC by far,
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
So BC, if you look at the price of eggs and chicken, BC is typically about 20% higher than the national average.
Now, obviously, as I say, food's the number one thing you can't avoid. You got to spend it. People on the lower end of the income scale, which now I think is around half the Canadians, are really feeling this pinch food wise.
Yeah.
But, I can't help, and I know you've done a lot of work on this, but I got to bring it back to supply management too, because that's government mandated higher costs. I mean, I've read recent reports where if we didn't have that, prices would be significantly less if we were talking about milk or cheese and,
Yeah.
yogurt, that kind of thing. So,
It is possible, okay, that
mhm.
prices would drop, but honestly, Michael, I've been studying marketing boards for
Yeah,
25 years, and I'm not convinced that retail prices are the most important factor when it comes to dealing with supply management. I think it boils down to competitiveness and
yeah,
innovation, which would bring more choice to the market and, of course, more competition. And typically, you see more stable prices. I've always believed that by trying to reduce prices of retail is really the wrong reason to reform supply management. So, but do we need to change the system? Absolutely, because the
yeah,
the biggest victims are the farmers themselves. They're disappearing.
yeah.
The
Well, look
the
at it as
regime itself is designed to manage a declining sector. It is
wow.
a no-win situation for everyone, starting with farmers.
And just speaking of competition, I mean, I'm going back to the Competition Bureau report about 2 years ago off the top of my head, and I think the Bank of Canada did one too. The lack of competition in Canada is one of the reasons, at least, for that discrepancy between the US and Canada.
Yeah, well, you always need competition. I mean, let's
Yeah.
face it, even if we get more players into the country, we always
Hmm.
need more competition. But what's ironic right now, Michael, is that while we're waiting for Mr. Wonderful to come into Canada and bring more competition like Lidl or Aldi, well, guess what? Canadian grocers are going south to the US.
Yeah.
TNT, owned by Loblaw, they
Yeah.
just opened one store in the US and they're looking at opening a second store in the US. Why? Because market conditions are much more attractive in the US. The government's job is to make sure that Canada is an attractive place to invest. And that's not what we've seen in the last 10 years.
Well, I'm looking actually in the States this week, and I didn't see how it applies directly to groceries, but their their Trump administration has promised to lower the regulation. And part of the bill introduced this week in Congress was to do exactly that. And hearing some of their top economists from the administration saying that's what we're sort of putting all our, oh, what a terrible cliche, eggs in the basket.
No,
But
exactly. And,
that's
and we,
what
we
they're
we
doing.
are talking about some important issues, Michael, right now. I mean, the last 3, 4 months, if there is one thing we should be thankful for, is the fact that we've actually increased our pressure against provinces to liberate us from ourselves by
Yes.
eliminating interprovincial trade barriers. If there is one province that can gain a lot from eliminating barriers, it would be BC. and of course
Oh,
us in the
interesting.
Atlantic. And so that actually would bring more competition to other parts of the country. We all know what the old out is. The old out is in the east, particularly with Ontario and Quebec. We haven't heard much from Quebec yet because they often use the language as an issue, not to trade
Yeah.
with other provinces. But I'm hoping that there'll be more pressure put on Quebec to actually liberate the market. Just this week, we saw a survey in Quebec suggesting that the majority of Quebecers are now favorable to a pipeline. That's a
Yes.
big
Yeah.
plus. That's a
Oh,
huge plus. So it means that
yeah.
something's going on here.
The other thing, back to the food prices, obviously why we compare them to the U.S., but our food price increases have been worse than many of the EU countries too. I mean, we're not.
Yeah.
It's not like we're doing well in the G7, and
So I do get that question a lot. So yeah,
mhm,
3.8%. So what? I mean, if everyone going through the same thing, we're not special. Actually, this time we are. In
mhm,
2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we knew we're going to be dealing with a global phenomenon. That's exactly what happened. And Canada remained in the lower tier to mid tier, basically, as a country with a high food inflation rate. We weren't the top. Right now, if you look at the G7 group of countries, we're basically number two after Japan. And Japan is always a bit of a different case because it's an island country. 80% of what they consume, they import. So it's a bit different. We don't have any excuse to be almost twice as high as America, for
yeah,
example. We're higher than Germany, we're higher than Italy, we're higher than England, we're higher than France, we're higher than most rich countries around the world right now, which means that this thing is policy induced. So Ottawa shouldn't be looking beyond Ottawa to try to explain itself or try to explain to the game public, well, something has gone awry, which is why I think Carney's decision to reduce tariffs or eliminate many of them affecting the food industry is a good decision. Now, the way it was made was
yeah.
hypocritical as far as I'm concerned because nobody knew about it, but he did do it on April 16th, and that went into force on May 7th. So we are expecting better numbers for the month of May and June.
Again, because tariffs, of course, have been in the news. You've got Loblaw's president saying they got a T to tell you how much of that price increase was tariffs. But again, just in case people aren't up to date, it was in the middle of the election campaign, as you've just pointed out, that the government signed an order to reduce or eliminate the tariffs, retaliatory tariffs. I'm saying,
On April
on a huge,
16th.
yeah, a huge number of those things, and of course, it's pretty
Well, we
blatant.
know now. I mean, on April 10th, if you remember,
Hmm.
Prime Minister Carney paused his campaign to meet with cabinet. Well, we know why now.
Yeah.
Basically, he wanted to depart from the Trudeau dollar for dollar response strategy, which I thought was an awful one, and I
Yes.
suspect that Mr. Carney agreed with that. And so he had this pickle to deal with. So I think what he basically did said, let's actually reduce most of the tariffs without any concessions with the US, which is not necessarily something that the elbows up crowd want to hear, but he
Yeah.
did it anyways, and he got champagne to actually say something in front of cameras. But during an election, Michael, people pay
Yeah.
attention to leaders, not to ministers. So that's why nobody knew about it.
Yeah, and it wasn't convenient politically given they were riding the wave of the elbows up. I mean, to me, it's that blatant what they were doing there. But we have removed some. That's good news. It's been an education, though, for a lot of people. When he first said retaliatory tariffs or Trump said
Let's
tariffs,
be tough. Let's
yeah.
respond. And to me, I mean, there are better ways to do this.
Oh,
And so we were basically hurting ourselves. And
yeah. Well,
and
that's what I
numbers
think.
that came out today are showing exactly that.
Well, and I think that's what the education was. Oh, you mean we pay retaliatory tariffs? Or Americans saying, oh, you mean we're the ones paying those tariffs?
And it
And
goes to
that's,
Ottawa.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
but they still have tariffs on some things. I'm just thinking the orange juice and something that people will notice is coffee.
Yeah.
That's still there. I'm not
So
sure the
coffee,
rationale to keep doing it. I'm not sure the
coffee, orange
rationale.
is symbolic. It's symbolic.
Oh,
Tariffs have become very political. It's a political
yeah,
issue. So the approach is still quite political. I'm frankly, despite the fact that I didn't like the lack of transparency, Prime Minister Carney made the right decision for Canadians, and
Yeah.
that's a good thing. That's reassuring for the future.
How kind of you. No, I'm just kidding. Well,
Yeah. Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
you have to kind of. I mean, I'm an academic.
no, no, you're right.
I'm
You're
not
correct.
routing for one party or another. I just look at logic, and
Yeah.
some decisions that were made by Trudeau were good, but most of them were really bad. And
Yeah.
so, and Carney's approach is different. He's got a different education. He sees numbers very
Yes.
differently. I think he actually cares about the economy. Now, how he sees the economy and how he wants to frame it is a different ball game.
Yeah.
But right now, dealing with this tariff war, I think he's actually adopting the right approach.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm with you. I think I said, but by the way, we said on the show, and day one when we announced retaliatory tariffs, I said that is not the right approach. It's not something I've seen after. It was so blatant. I know we're going to make you pay, President Trump. We're going to pay more. I thought the logic was a little weak on that. But the good news, as you say, we've reduced some. I wish they were all gone. But that it's too easy to say our challenges with food are all about the tariffs, and they're not. I mean, this is something you've been writing about eloquently for years and
Yeah.
saying there's several things that we have. I'll give you an example that most people won't think of. It's our labeling costs, our packaging costs. Those kinds of things have an
Well,
impact directly in
bureaucracy
what
in
I pay.
general. If
Yeah.
you want to basically use one term, they call it bureaucracy. In the
Hmm.
U.S., of course, they're dealing with that, which is why I'm concerned about our futures, our agri-food sector's future, how competitive it will be because, well, in the U.S. they're actually eliminating bureaucracy. They're not
Yes.
dealing with the carbon tax or any carbon pricing mechanism federally. While in Canada, we still have the carbon tax up the food chain, the industry carbon tax. That's impacting our competitiveness and, of course, the bureaucracy. So, but like I said, we're starting to hear premiers looking into this, which is good news in general.
Well, I think it's like many of the things, they have to make it a goal. One of the challenges, and this is a legitimate part of a political debate. I say they do too many things, they're trying too many things, and then hence too many things are done poorly. I'm not debating even the merits. I could do that
Yeah,
in some instances, but it's
yeah,
very difficult to find something they're doing well, and they keep on expanding what they want, they're doing. So I think that's a challenge, but I would love to have them say with meaning, we want to get our food sector more competitive. I'm going to bring prices down with that competition and choice, et cetera. They got to make it a goal because there's a little
yeah.
list that I know that if they have gone to you, by the way,
Well,
you have
uh,
testified in front of the Commons
oh,
committees,
many
et cetera.
times,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you kind of have to go back to last week when the cabinet was appointed, and I don't know how you felt about the cabinet, but I came out of the experience being even more nervous. You
Mhm.
saw similar faces. When it comes to ag, we saw a new face when we actually
Yeah.
had a very competent ag minister in Cody Blois. He's a
Yep.
liberal, but he's voted against his own parliament, his own party at times, in committees, on committees. So I thought he was the right person. They didn't. Mr. Carney didn't appoint him, unfortunately. And two, transport is probably arguably the second most important portfolio for the agri-food sector. And who's in charge? Chrystia Freeland.
Mhm.
And her track record is not great when it comes to being part of the cabinet.
Well, our goofy last week it was just an interesting thing, whether it was a huge amount of the public voting or Mr. Carney appointing cabinet. Track record didn't seem to be the priority
No,
consideration. I mean,
absolutely
I'm
not.
not even
No.
sure where to go with that still. If we're not talking about track record, the facts, the research, et cetera, I'm not sure what the conversation is. But yeah, I think that's one of the things he's going to have to overcome if he wants confidence to be restored because Chrystia Freeland, as you say, now taking over an important aspect of
Oh
the
yeah.
agricultural market, and her track record in finance wasn't very good. And
It
so,
was awful. It was
yeah, I think
awful.
that's
And
a better
so
way of putting it. Yeah.
and we can't really have that for
No.
the agri-food sector. We need someone that is authoritative, that doesn't really just talk the talk, but actually does something about things that needs to be done, especially for BC. I mean, logistics are so important for this
Yeah.
province. We experienced that many times over the years.
Well, we'll have to see. So let me finish with this. I know you got a huge day ahead of you, and we appreciate so much you finding time for us. Uh, if you were going to look for a good sign in the agricultural sphere coming from government policy, and they're not going to sort of be able to do it all in 5 minutes. We'd like to hear about it, but just if you saw, okay, that's a really good sign. Like I agree with you, interprovincial trade barriers have been a bugaboo for years. I mean, they're costing the economy a ton. But I'm saying beyond that, or maybe that is the one that they have to make progress when it comes to agricultural products when they talk interprovincial trade.
Yeah, I will be looking for two things. One, the
Right.
government's commitment to processing in particular. And by the way, Michael, the Liberal Party was the only party that actually promised something about food processing in its
Mm-hmm.
platform. So it's
Yeah.
$200 million. It's not much. It's not much, but it was there. So
Yeah.
I'm looking for that commitment if they're going to deliver on that. And two, in their platform also, they've promised to look at all policy issues through an economic lens. CFIA, Health Canada, anything that has to be agri-food, it has to. There needs to be a business case for everything they do. So I'm going to be looking for that. They've promised it, and I hope to deliver on it.
Yeah. I'm with you. I hope they do. Don't ask me
So
to
the
bet.
platform looked nice,
Yeah.
but
Don't
they're
ask me to bet a
liberals.
nickel. Yeah, for sure.
On execution, sometimes, well, some there's something lacking,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, I'm going to call on you again. It's always terrific. I know you got to go, but it's terrific to get a chance to talk with you. And people can find you at the Food Professor on X, and check it out. Tons of great data that I get. I check on it every day to see, okay, is there
You
something
do, and
else
thank
that's
you for
come up?
that.
Yeah, no, great stuff. The Food Professor. Sylvain, thanks for finding time.
My pleasure.